Okay, students, now we're going to start on the unit circle. So there are things that you have to learn first. We have been using the unit circle indirectly with the trig functions. Now we're going to spend some time on the unit circle. So you need to understand this. You will need this for trig and for classes that you take next year. First, today's date is 4/23/20. Okay, and remember that the unit circle, here's the unit circle, the radius is 1. And look what it says. A unit circle is a circle with a radius of 1 unit. That's very important because the value of r is 1. That means the radius is equal to 1 for each point. P, notice x comma y on the circle. So every point on the circle is a point x, y on the circle. The sine, cosine, and tangent values for theta are defined as, well, remember what we said about the unit circle, right? That the sine is y over r, which is 1. So that just makes the sine of theta just y. And then the cosine is x over r, which is 1, so that just makes it x. Again, it's only because we're talking about the unit circle and the radius is 1. And the tangent, of course, is y over x. So that's key to this part here. So notice what we're going to see here. The coordinates of P can be written as the cosine of theta, comma, the sine of theta. Because remember, x, y, oops, not that one, this one, x, y. So cosine is theta, is x, and the sine of theta is y, x, y. So instead of putting x, you put cosine and theta, and that's very important for you to remember. So remember the special angles, 0, 30, 45, 60, 90, 180, 270, and 360, because 0, 90, 180, 270, and 360. But it also applies if it's written in radians. 0 pi, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi when it goes around the circle. So what you're going to do is you're going to start filling this out. I'm going to do a couple. You're going to do some for homework. And also you're going to work on the unit circle, which we're going to do next. Okay? So before we answer this question, before we answer the degrees over here, let's look at labeling the ordered pairs for each angle in the unit circle. And we're going to use these angles as reference angles. Underline that, reference angles for the remaining angles around the circle. So when you find these, to find the ones that are larger than the these, then you use the reference angles, which you learned in earlier sections. Adjust your coordinates by looking at which quadrant the point is located. Which quadrant? And the reason we need to know that is because the quadrant tells us when we have positive or negative for those values. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so the first thing we do before we fill this out, let's look at the unit circle. So here's the unit circle, okay? And you'll have this downloaded in the, it'll be available to you with the, in Google Classroom so that you can start filling this out. Okay, so the first thing we want to do in filling this out is fill out some things. Yes, there are some things you have to learn and you have to memorize. So I'm going to help you with that by writing some things here that are going to be important. First of all, on this corner here, put down cosine and then sine, which we just determined because that is x and that is y, right? So every point is going to be, the first point is cosine, the second point is sine, and then of course the tangent, you just put the sine over the cosine. Okay, but we're not going to do with the tangent at the present. Okay, we're going to do sine and cosine right now. Okay, now remember, this is a unit circle. So from this point to here, remember that's a 1, right? So that's 1, and it doesn't go up. So that's 1, 0, right? If I go from here to here, it's 1, 0. If I go from here to here, it's 0, 1. That's just basic graphing on a coordinate plane. And over here, we go left -1, and then 0. And down here, you go down 0 and -1. And right away from that, we already have the sine, right? I mean, the cosine and the sine of 0 and 360, which is right here. Okay. Then we have the cosine and the sine at 90, the cosine and the sine at 180, the cosine and the sine at 270. And again, 0 and 360 is the same. And also an important thing to remember, which I'm going to put it in a different color for you, is remember this. All students take calculus, okay, which we learned recently. All the signs are positive. Sine is positive with its reciprocal, the cosecant. Tangent and cotangent are positive in this quadrant. And then the cosine and secant is positive in the fourth quadrant. Okay? So remember, this means all. This means that the sine and the cosecant are positive in this quadrant. This means that the tangent and the cotangent are positive in the third quadrant. And this means that we have cosine and secant is positive in this quadrant. All right? So again, remember, cosine is first, then sine. So we already talked about this in the first part. The sine is just y over 1, or just y. Cosine is x. And of course, the tangent is y over x. Also remember that the reciprocal of the sine, which is cosecant theta, that's going to be 1 over y. The secant, right, of theta is going to be 1 over x because it's the reciprocal. And the cotangent of theta here is going to be x over y. And I wrote it next to it so you can remember. Okay? So remember, summary of signs in the quadrant. We just wrote it up there. Quadrant 1, they're all positive. In quadrant 2, only the sine and the cosecant are going to be positive. The cosine is going to be negative, and so is this going to be negative. In the third quadrant, the only one that's positive is tangent and cotangent. The rest are negative. In the fourth quadrant, this is negative, and the cosine is positive, and the tangent and cotangent are negative. So if you want to write under here, sine and cosecant, cosine and secant, and tangent and cotangent. That way you could remember that those are the pairs. So remember these signs, right? And knowing that, okay, that's going to help you determine. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about radians. Remember, this is 0 radians and 2 pi radians for 360. This is pi of 90 degrees is pi over 2. 180 is just pi. And 270 is 3 pi divided by 2. So this is degrees, these are radians. You have to know this basic stuff to begin with. Okay? And if you didn't see the bottom part, I'm going to show it so you can take a minute to copy it if you didn't see it while I was writing it. Okay? So take a minute and copy it. What I said, cosecant, secant, cotangent are related here. These are y over x, okay? And then you have these, that plus the positive, positive, negative, 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 positive, negative, positive, negative, related to depending on what quadrant it's in, okay? So if you need to pause that so you can copy it. You're going to have a blank copy available to you in Google Classroom, okay? So now we could go back to, okay, your notes that we were working on, which is this one, okay? And now we could go in and start filling in some of the angles for this, okay? So first of all, in this one, okay, in the first one, it's going to be right here at 0, 0. So we need, what is the radians? Okay, well, the radians is 0 pi, right? So it's going to be 0 pi and 360 degrees, right, is 2 pi. Okay, for the sine of that, remember the sine is the second part because it's xy. So that's going to be 0. Okay, the cosine you can fill out. What is the tangent? Okay, now remember the point is going to be 1 comma 0. So then you could fill out the rest. Okay, for 30 degrees. Okay, well, 30 degrees in radians, isn't that pi over 6? Okay, which we did. And then what you have to do is remember your special right triangles here. Okay, so if you were to do the special right triangles for 30, 60, okay, I'm going to write it on a separate sheet of paper here. So I'm just going to do 30 over here, and this is 60. Remember, this is 1, this is 2, square root of 3. And then over here, I'm going to do the 45, 45, so that you can have it together. 45, 45, this is 1, and that's the square root of 2. So if I want the sine of 30, right, isn't that 1 over 2? Okay, so this is 1 over 2. Okay, all right. If I want the tangent of 30, okay, that's 1 over the square root of 3, right? So 1 over the square root of 3, right? So then I would have equal to square root of 3 multiply top and bottom. That gives me the square root of 3 over 3. Okay, and therefore my point for that one is going to be, what 2 points did I use? Okay, well, my points I use for this one, remember my sine is 1/2 here. Okay, but I need the cosine. Well, the cosine of this is the square root of 3 over 2, isn't it? The square root of 3, if I go back to this one, okay, the cosine is square root of 3 over 2. So that's the square root of 3 over 2, square root of 3 over 2. Okay, now let's do one more. Let's go down to 270. Okay, so in 270, in radians, it is 3 pi over 2. Okay, in radians is 3 pi over 2. Well, 3 pi over 2, remember the sign is going to be -1. The cosine is going to be 0. Okay, you're going to figure out the tangent of that by putting sine over the cosine. I'll let you do that. Okay, let me bring that up a little bit so you can see it. And then I'm going to bring this down a little bit so you can see better that way. So then this gives me the tangent you're going to do. And remember what point we use. We use 0, comma, -1. All right? So listen to the video. Use the graph that I gave you. Okay? Use this chart here to help you determine where to move and how to calculate the points, and finish that worksheet. And then you'll have more practice. Take care, be safe. Talk to you the next time. Mr. Soto says goodbye.